When we think of World War II weapons, we picture tanks rolling across Europe, spies slipping poison pills into wine, paratroopers leaping into darkness. But in occupied Norway, the most dangerous weapon wasn't made of steel or gunpowder. It was a small silver loop of metal, a humble office supply, the kind you've probably lost under your desk at least once. It was a small silver loop of metal. The paperclip, that little twist of wire designed to hold papers together, became something far greater during the Nazi occupation. It became a symbol, a silent shout, a badge of unity worn not by soldiers, but by teachers, students, and ordinary citizens who refused to be broken. This is the true story of how a simple paperclip sparked an act of quiet defiance that historians now call an unconditional ideological defeat upon Nazism in Norway. Let's go back to 1940. Germany invades Norway. Tanks roll, cities fall, the government flees. King Haakon VII, beloved monarch, symbol of independence, escapes to Britain, leaving behind a nation under occupation. The Nazis install their puppet regime, Vidkun Quisling, a name so synonymous with betrayal it entered the dictionary as a verb to quisle. And one of their first moves? Erase Norwegian identity. They banned the king's monogram, they outlawed royal portraits, they silenced national songs. Even wearing a pin with the king's initials could get you arrested. So Norwegians faced a problem. How do you show you're still Norwegian without getting thrown in prison? They needed a symbol, something subtle, something innocent-looking, something the Nazis wouldn't immediately recognize as rebellion. And then someone had an idea. What if we wear a paperclip? Not because it was flashy, not because it glittered, but because of what it meant. In Norwegian, the word for paperclip is binders, from the verb å binde, which means to bind or to unite. So when you wore a paperclip on your lapel, you weren't just holding up your coat. You were saying, we are bound together. We will not be torn apart. And it was perfect. To the untrained eye, just office clutter. To a German officer, harmless, insignificant. But to a Norwegian, it was a whisper of resistance, a wink of solidarity, a tiny act of courage clipped to a shirt. The movement started in schools. Students began wearing paperclips on their collars, in their hair, even braided into bracelets. Then teachers followed, quietly, calmly, defiantly. But this wasn't just about fashion. It was part of a much bigger stand. Because at the same time, the Nazi-backed regime tried to take over the education system. They demanded all teachers join a new state-controlled union, one that would teach Nazi ideology to children. Propaganda disguised as lessons, hatred passed off as history, and the teachers said no. Over 12,000 of them, nearly the entire teaching corps, refused to comply. They wrote letters, they organized protests, they were threatened, intimidated, and still they stood firm. When the regime realized the paperclip wasn't just a trend, but a growing symbol of coordinated resistance, they did what oppressive regimes always do: they banned it. Wearing a paperclip, now illegal, punishable by arrest. But banning a paperclip is like trying to stop the wind with a fence. The more they cracked down, the more people wore them. And then came the arrests. Thousands of teachers, men and women who had spent their lives educating children, were taken from their homes, sent to concentration camps in the north, where they endured freezing cold, forced labor and isolation. Yet, they did not break. Even in captivity, they continued to teach. Secret classes in math, language, history, anything the Nazis didn't want them to know. They smuggled notes, recited poetry, kept their minds sharp, their spirit unbroken. And something remarkable happened. The Norwegian people saw what was happening, and instead of being cowed, they grew stronger. The resistance swelled. More paperclips appeared, more acts of quiet defiance, and the Nazi-backed government began to crumble under the weight of its own failure. Because you can occupy a country with tanks, you can silence radios and burn books, but you cannot force a people to stop believing in themselves. Faced with unwavering resistance, especially from the teachers, the regime had no choice. They repealed the mandatory union, they released the prisoners, and quietly admitted defeat. Not with bombs, not with armies, but with a nation that refused to clip its soul. Now, here's a fun twist. For decades, Norwegians believed the paperclip was invented by a Norwegian man named Johan Vale. He even has statues, parades, national pride. National problem? His design was never patented, never mass-produced. And honestly, it wasn't even a very good paperclip. But the myth stuck. And during the war, it gave the symbol even more power. It's ours, people thought. A Norwegian invention, holding us together. Truth or not, it worked. Today, the paperclip stands as a monument to peaceful resistance. At the National Memorial for the Fallen Teachers in Norway, a giant paperclip sculpture rises like a beacon. And every year, students leave real ones at its base. Because the lesson isn't just about WWII. It's about what happens when ordinary people choose unity over fear. When courage shows up not in a uniform, but in a classroom, on a lapel, in a tiny loop of metal. So, next time you pick up a paperclip, don't just see a tool. See a story of teachers who taught truth in the dark, of students who dared to wear their loyalty, of a nation that held itself together, one clip at a time, like this deep dive. Hit like if you've ever underestimated a small act of courage. Subscribe for more stories of quiet heroes who changed the world. Share it. Tag someone who needs to remember. Resistance doesn't need a weapon, it just needs a will. And remember, sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones you can hold in your hand.